Well, this was an embarrassing teacher moment. It didn't really run at all. So instead, I'm coloring the inside of my owl totally with water. And I can see where I've colored because it's running a tiny bit. So I'm just working in the owl areas. I'm doing that wet and wet technique. So everywhere that I wet, my paint will run. Now I'm gonna add just a little bit of orange paint and just let it bleed. So it's staying in the interior spaces of the owl because that area is wet and the space around it isn't. And I'm not worried about like, oh, am I painting the eye perfect or anything like that. I'm just kind of going with this flow that it's bleeding. And I could have done this with black ink and pretend that it did bleed, but you just want to be really subtle with it so that it's not too dark. I actually kind of wish that I had done less pigment, so I'm gonna do that. So now I'm taking my brush, I'm wringing out all the paint so I have a pretty dry brush, and see how I can go back in and kind of pull some of that pigment out. And then I just wipe my brush on my paper towel, pull out pigment, and keep doing that until now I just have this very subtle, not overwhelmingly painted owl. So this could be one technique that you guys decide to do for your final draft. And again, subtle and done. For each of our animals, you want to choose a color harmony. So for this one, I'm going to do an analogous color scheme where the colors are next to each other, which look really good on watercolor paintings. And the method I'm going to do for this is called the drip method. So here we go. I'm going to water, let's see, I'll do yellow, green, and blue. And I'm gonna get them pretty watery. And you want to have just your brush really saturated when you do this. So all you do for this is you take your brush and you scrape it along the edge of your paper, and then you kind of let it tap down and it gives you this drippy effect. Now you can do this like, let's say I wanted to make his little gobbler. Maybe I want to like paint in, oh, I have some drips there, his gobbler thingy. And then just have that drip. You can do it that way too. So you can be a little more intentional about where you drip. You can also take a straw, which I don't have, but I know you guys can get with your slushies. You can take a straw and kind of make that pile of paint like I just did, and then then blow the paint in whatever direction you want, and it kind of like branches out and looks really cool. So just play around with a combination of colors. As you do this, and since we're using colors that are next to each other side by side, when they interact and mix, they make a tertiary color. So I'm also getting some like cool teals and yellow green. It would probably be better to mix and prep your colors in your palette so you don't contaminate them. So think about that too as you're going, or clean your brush really well between colors. So that's your drip method. It's a little bit crazy and wild if you're going for that look. For this one, we are also going to do an analogous color scheme. So our colors next to each other anywhere on the color wheel. This time, maybe, I think I'm gonna kind of go with warmer colors. And what I'm gonna do is we're gonna paint this in stages. So everybody should have a shape or shapes or lines around their bird. I've got a few. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do that method where I wet the area that I want to paint. And I'm gonna wet it very, very carefully and intentionally. And I'm gonna do one area at a time because remember, this paper isn't super expensive, so it dries fast. So I've got my color, and now I'm just gonna drop it in. To the area that I just wet down, and I'm gonna let it kind of do its thing. It can pool and be a little bit more random, so it's not like a flat wash. It looks kind of cloudy, which is a nice watercolor effect. Then I'll go to my next area, clean my brush, wet this in right here. And you'll see that what I'm doing is I'm painting in the shape where the bird is not. So be specific about an area that you want to paint in. Don't lift or tilt your paper, otherwise it'll drip out. And so that's the only area that I have where the animal's not. You can see that my two triangles are intersecting. So I'm actually going to do something kind of different right here. I'm going to I kind of just made this decision right now. I'm gonna wet this area right here, and I'm gonna let the orange bleed into it, because here I'm gonna do a yellow triangle, and for the areas where the two triangles intersect, I'm gonna let it become a tertiary color of yellow-orange. So I have this part. Again, this is the part where the bird isn't, so the negative space around the bird inside the shape. Clean my brush really well because yellow is a very light color. And I'm going to do the same exact thing where I wet my interior of the shape first, and then I drop color in. And notice I didn't do this area. I didn't do the area where I just painted because I don't want those to bleed together. So I'm going to keep that, I'm going to not paint into it for a second. Okay, so see how that's kind of bleeding a little bit over? So all I need to do right now is take my paper towel and just kind of like stop the paint from spreading, which doesn't always work, but usually it does. And you can even take a wet brush that's clean and kind of wring the water out and pick the paint up like that. So because I made that mistake right here, sometimes you can't get those mistakes out. So if that happens, what you're gonna do is just make sure that when you go to paint the bird, you paint it a darker color, and it shouldn't show up. Okay, I'm gonna move on to my next area. And now, this might still be wet, so what I'm gonna do is be very, very careful to not let my brush be too watery, and I'm almost gonna just paint a line that separates the two so they don't intersect. And this is really hard to do with the wet on wet method because you can't really see where your water is because there's no color in it. But I think I did a good job. And you know what? I just remembered I'm gonna overlap these two colors to make a yellow orange, so I can do that. I can actually pull it right over. I forgot I was doing that. All right. So now I'm gonna set this aside, let it dry completely, and then I'll go in and paint the bird. So I have this stuff called masking fluid. It's a lot like rubber cement because once it dries, you can actually like rub it off of the surface. And what it does is it masks off certain areas. So let's say you have something like the teeth of a bear or anything that you want to stay completely white. Well, you can see that there's no white in your palette, right? So what you'll do is you'll put masking fluid down, let it dry, and then do your painting. Because it's really hard to keep areas pure white when you're painting right around it. To add the masking fluid, you need to use these little rubber applicators. You don't want to use a paintbrush because it'll destroy the paintbrush. So again, put it on, let it dry. When you're finished with this, you just take a paper towel and you just wipe it off, and then it's good. So here's an example of masking fluid that I laid down yesterday, and I just painted over it. The paint's not totally dry, so I don't think I can actually peel it off right now, but here, actually right there. So see how if I just go like that, it comes right off. But since my paint wasn't dry, I kind of ruined it. So make sure that your paint is dry. This I'll have to do later when the paint is totally dry, but maybe not. So you can see it just like peels right off. So that's how it works. Let's go ahead and paint our bear now. For the bear, I do want to have some earth tones, but I do not want to use brown. So instead, I'm going to kind of play around with colors that I know will make it brown. So you can do complementary colors, which are our colors right across from each other on the color wheel. Or you can do a triad, which will make brown too. So I think I'm actually going to do that. I might just do red, yellow, and blue, a primary triad, to show you guys how when they intersect, they do become a very earthy tone. And remember, we're doing tattoo designs, and tattoos don't really have a lot of brown, right? You want to encourage color, and in art, we're not going always for what's perfectly realistic. We are trying to make our own cool effects. So I am gonna just directly paint onto my bear. Again, I always want to test how vibrant things are, and that's just way, 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 way too vibrant. So I'm gonna mix my colors in the lid again. I think I'm actually gonna get all my colors ready. Okay, I have my red, yellow, and blue mixed up and ready. They're nice and watery. I've tested them all out on scratch paper to make sure they're not too bright. And you guys, that's really important. So do test your colors. Make sure they're not too bright on your final draft, because that would kind of be a bummer. So I actually had a little blue left in my brush, so it's already mixing to make purple, which is fine because eventually it's going to do that anyway. But I meant to apply my red, and my brush is pretty wet, so I just need to be really careful that I start to control my water better. So I'm going to take my paintbrush and just keep it more dry since I already have these watery colors. All right, now I'm just going to get a little crazy with my colors, and I'm just going to start to pull a little blue in, let things kind of run together and mix. Maybe I'll kind of pull the blue further into the red. I'm painting right over the teeth where I put that masking fluid down, because once it's dry later, I can peel it right off. I'm not going to have you guys do that for this practice one, but you can definitely do it for your final draft. Okay, I'm going to kind of wet this down, keep things really wet, work really fast so that my colors do bleed together. When I add that yellow, it'll make its own cool color of like a shade of green. And I'm even going to let my yellow run all the way through both and kind of into the red, so So I start to get these earthy, kind of muddy colors, which sometimes people don't like those. It all depends on the effect that you're going for. I'm kind of going for that earthy feeling, and you can see that I'm avoiding the nose and the tongue, just so I can show you that you can still keep areas white if you're careful. Go back in with my blue. Just in this area. Kind of just doing this at random. Go back in with my red. And again, just let the colors mix together. I've been wiping my brush off a lot as I go to pull some colors out if they get a little bit too puddly. If you guys see these puddles and you don't want them, take a dry brush or a paper towel and just pull them right out. You want them, let's say I want them, get my blue, get it really puddly. Maybe I want it to like drip down and make the neck look like it's running off the page. That's an option too. Okay, so maybe for that nose and mouth, I'll go in with a clean brush, and I'm not going to use my watery colors. I'll go straight in with a more vibrant red, and you can see that I can get really detailed with the very point of this brush, and I'm hardly touching the brush on the page. And maybe I'll kind of go in and add a little bit of red to both ears just to tie it all together. And then when this is all dry, I'll rub the masking fluid off and that will be finished. The bear is dry and I just rubbed the masking fluid off so you can see that the teeth stayed nice and white. My owl is totally dry, so for this one I'm going to do a split complementary color scheme, which is where you make an isosceles triangle somewhere on the color wheel. So if I kind of shift this triangle over, I can do orange, which I've already used. Maybe I'll do red, and then I'll do like a turquoise, so a blue-green. So orange, red, and blue-green will be my three colors for this. Just because branches are brown doesn't mean I have to paint it brown. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna just directly paint my branch in. So with this, I have not wet it down first. I'm just gonna go in, I'm gonna get my brush wet. Maybe I'll take a piece of scrap paper and just kind of test how dark things are before I dive in. Make sure that's the effect I like. You know what, I think that's way too vibrant for how soft my owl is. So instead, I'm gonna take some red into my lid or my palette and water it down so that it's a lot more subtle. And now I'll test that out and say, yeah, that's better. I really want this to be, oh, sorry, you can't see it. I really want this to be subtle and not overwhelming and too vibrant. So I just added a lot more water to it. And now I'm just dropping that paint very intentionally into these small areas. If you need an even smaller brush, I do have them, so don't hesitate. But these brushes are actually pretty good. You can get a pretty fine point just with this. So I'm just adding more paint onto my brush that I mixed up in the palette. All right, and now that this branch is painted, again, I'm gonna set this aside, let it dry completely, and I will address the negative space in a bit. So the shapes around my bird are totally dry. I'm ready to go in and paint the bird. I started with 2 colors next to each other on the color wheel, so I think I'm actually going to continue with that and go do a split complement again. So I'm going to have orange and yellow, and then the split complement to that would be blue-violet, because blue, violet, and yellow-orange are complements, and then you just split it. So blue-violet is going to be my color. I've already mixed blue-violet up in the lid by mixing blue and violet together, and I've tested it out. I think that's a little bit too dark, because again, I just don't want things to be like crazy powerful. It's more about subtlety with watercolor, not, you know, dark, rich, vibrant pigment, unless you want it. So I'm just gonna go in and I'm gonna check my color again. Still too bright. So I'm just gonna keep adding water until it's light enough. And always check it. Okay, I'm ready to go. So I'm gonna add this nice subtle blue-violet to my bird. And remember, I messed up right here. I do have a solution for that here in just a second. And as long as I just am pretty careful, my colors won't bleed together. If you leave a little space between your colors, then they won't bleed and run. Or again, you just move on, let it dry, and come back to it later on. So I've decided that for the wings where I have the hatching and texture, I'm gonna make it that more pigmented dark blue color. So I'm gonna kind of add pigment into my water, test it on my scratch paper. Now it's nice and dark. So I'll have the same color, but it's just different values. And it kind of allows me to cover up some of my mistakes that I made. And I don't want this to bleed into the bird that I just painted, so I'm going to leave a tiny space. And I don't have very much water on my brush. If I do, I'll just take it off. I can always like run it over the side. I do a lot of blotting with the paper towel. And if my color gets too light, I'll just mix in more paint as I go. Oh, that's really dark. See, that's what happens when you don't test. Let's see, I can fix that. I'll show you how to fix it. Ah! And I've got too much paint on my brush. I went outside the lines. Okay, I'm just gonna rinse my brush out, wring it out, and use a clean, kind of dry brush to pull that out. It's even a different color. Man, I just showed you guys exactly what not to do. I did that on purpose, right? No, but sometimes it is kind of nice when I do make these mistakes so you guys can see how to fix them. So it's still too bright and too purple in these areas, so I'm just continuing to take my kind of clean dry brush and pull that pigment out while it's still wet. It's all about timing. And I actually like this purplish color better, so I think I'm just gonna add that purpley color to this wing. And pull it out just like I did the last one. Okay, I am done. I did it pretty fast, so there's quite a bit of mistakes, and I dropped my brush when I finished. So you can always take a wet towel and just wipe it off, but sometimes it works better than other times. I'm back on the owl. It was originally, you can't tell because I just covered it in tape, orange and red, and I'm doing that split complement, so orange and red with that blue green is going to be my color harmony. I taped the bird off so that you can see that this is another method of masking your subject if you're worried about splattering inside of it. I did a pretty terrible job of taping because I taped it really fast, but I want to show you that you can do those wash methods that we talked about yesterday if you work really quickly into the background. So I think I've already mixed up a nice blue-green. I've added a lot of water to it and tested its color so that it's real nice and subtle. And I am going to, because I want this to kind of look very watercolor-ish, I'm gonna wet the area first, and I'm gonna go so fast. So I'm very quickly adding water to each area. And if you need to use a bigger brush for this, you can. We have larger round brushes that might be helpful. And now while it's wet, I'm just dropping that color in. And I probably don't even need the tape because I did an okay job of staying away from the owl. But the reason I have the tape there is, what if I wanted to do like that paper plastic bag technique or blotting or something like that? It could, by adding the plastic bag, it could make that water run into the areas I don't want it. So it's helpful to have the tape there. Now I'm going to go to my next area, wet that down, and I want you guys to choose one method that we did yesterday to do in your negative space here. So maybe it's going to be the salt method, maybe it'll be a paper towel blotting method, maybe the plastic bag, or the toothbrush effect, which if you're doing the toothbrush, you definitely want to cover your subject with either a piece of paper or tape. Okay, and I'm okay that I have these little puddles. I'm not gonna pull them out with my paper towel because I'm gonna lay down plastic right now, and I kind of want it to look crazy. So again, you bunch up your plastic as good as possible, set it on there, put something heavy on top, and then let it dry completely. And I'm guessing because I put the plastic down, it will bleed into the owl areas, and since I didn't do a very good job taping, it might not look the best, but we'll find out. It's not totally dry, but I want to show you guys the results. Okay, I just peeled the tape off. You can see that the tape actually took some of this paper off because it's inexpensive paper. In addition to that, I would always use the blue tape because this is stickier and it'll damage your project. So good experimenting. I love the way the background turned out. Good luck.